Well, thank you for staying with us. Time now for us to get into the newspapers. But right before we do, Endpoint Homeopathic Clinic making it possible for us to bring you this news review segment. And they're offering free prostate screening, free female fertility screening as well to all of us. And here is where we can locate them so we can tap into this. Here in Accra, Spintex opposite the Shell signboard in Kumasi, Krodumabwe here behind the Angel Educational Complex. There's Takrady Anaji Estate, there's Tema Community 22, Techiman Hansua, and Esiama Inzama. You can also reach them on these numbers to make a booking: 0244 867 068 or 0274 234 321. Endpoint Homeopathic Clinic, the end to chronic disease. But only the beginning of the news review, and we're joined by Joyce Bawa Mokhtari. If you didn't know her already, well, she is a lawyer, and she also is spokesperson for former President John Dramani Mahama. I call her Auntie Joyce. It's been quite a while. How have you been?
Very well, thank you. A very good morning to you. Long time no see.
I think you would have to unmute. Okay, so you can, I think if you spoke now, I would be able to hear you. I didn't hear you earlier.
I said good morning to you and long time no see.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's pretty early. We're grateful that you've taken the time to do this. A lot is happening in our country, and usually when I have guests like this, join us on the news review, I'd like to find out from them what they feel about developments across the country. I know you're affiliated to a party that is in opposition, but when you look at our country, maybe putting down your political lenses and just focusing on being a Ghanaian, what do you see from our economy to sports to health to education? I mean, we were just talking about the Ghana Senior High School in Tamale, where some students have used toilet facilities or washrooms as cubicles. Now, the Ghana Education Service has intervened. We hear there's going to be a second round of domestic debt exchange, that program, and this time pension funds are going to be involved as well. I mean, the dynamics are myriad, but from where you sit, what do you think about Ghana when you think of Ghana now?
Well, thank you very much. I'm sure that like everybody else, I would honestly have hoped that things would actually be a lot better. I'm sure that many Ghanaians, irrespective of where you stand, who actually went out there to, campaign for and demand for a change in government, for example, are probably also very, very disappointed. I think that all the newspaper headlines this morning paint a very dark picture, not just for myself and for you, but for everybody else out there. For parents who have to find money to pay school fees, for example, for their wards. For parents whose children are in some of these schools that we all have been talking about. For parents whose children have nothing else to, eat and drink, but the school feeding dishes that are provided in their schools. And of course, for the schools that have so many children now, that there's very little that they can do to support them because they don't have adequate infrastructure. The facilities are probably bursting at their seams. And sometimes it is very difficult for you to blame the authorities in these schools. What can they do? When you look at that letter that has come, literally asking the headmasters to stand aside, where is the due process? What is the procedure that has gone on even before being asked to actually stand aside? And of course, what went into that news story about the children even using those facilities? Because when you look closely, yes, you see a little corner somewhere, but I'm not too sure that we've even undertaken adequately investigations into this matter. Look at where our economy is.
Well, they were saying, Madam Mokhtari, they were saying, look, this was the same headmaster and the senior housemaster at Post, so we're going to investigate the matter and they will step aside. Now, post the investigations, they would have to enforce whatever has been proposed. Do you think that is wrong?
I honestly think it's a bit too harsh.
Okay.
I think it also serves more or less as a way of gagging head teachers and teachers in some of these institutions.
Do you feel they're being victimized?
Oh, I believe that. If I were a teacher, for example, I mean, my mother has been a teacher for well over 50 years, and I saw such a letter. In future, I would never speak to a journalist, speak to an investigator. I'll probably not even complain at all. And I will endeavor to ensure that no student even makes a mistake to take photographs of anything. And look, this is exactly what we are all talking about. And when you look at the US Human Rights Report, the Afrobarometer, all of these findings actually speak to matters of this kind. And this is not the first time that a matter of this kind has come up. You remember some time back when a teacher complained about the quality of food in the school. Something similar occurred when a teacher complained about the numbers they were receiving and that they didn't have the infrastructure even to accept all these children who were being transferred to these schools. Something similar happened. When I look at what is happening in our economy, for example, regarding the bondholders, my best photograph to sum up everything about the economy is a photograph of our former Chief Justice, Madame Sufaya Akufo. It literally summarizes for each and every one just where we are as a people. I recall a video about the finance minister appearing before the IMF board, and it might sound like a very light thing to say, but for an hour and a half, I didn't hear the Honorable Colonel Furiata make any reference to any biblical quotations or anything for that matter. If he were here in Ghana, for the people who actually elected him into office, he would have spent copious amounts of time casting aspersions and all these subtle jabs at people and little shades here and there, and even refusing actually to respond to any questions, for example. You know, why do we treat people who go out there and elect us into office in this manner? I know others in another category of persons who are currently waiting because they have monies in their Euro bonds as they invested in. I know some who retired from very high positions who invested in these Euro bonds because, of course, we're told that they are high yielding. They are totally in limbo. They speak to their relationship bankers and the relationship officers in the banks, and certainly they don't get any news at all. Nobody says anything to them.
Right.
You know, I think that one of the biggest challenges in terms of how our economy has been managed so far is the lack of absolute transparency. We just have the authorities come out and tell us exactly what they think is going on, what they expect to happen, what they want to anticipate. And look at the headline this morning. For us to be told that very soon we'll be securing an IMF deal and that Ghana has received a lot of attention and mention for coming out of its economic recovery or succeeding in its economic recovery. I mean, seriously? Have you gone out there to see how ordinary Ghanaian families are coping? Food prices, since we heard about a sharp decline in inflation, have you heard that food prices have gone down? It took a huge pushback for the markup on petroleum products to be withdrawn and to be reversed. You know, look, it is not that I am speaking because I'm a politician. I'm sure you and I also had concerns when the NDC was in office a few years ago. I'm sure there were many people within the NDC who even went out there to vote against their own political party. I'm sure you and I also know that there are many other floating voters who really don't mind who is in office that much. They just look at the issues, the economy, the state of our infrastructure, the state of our health, the state, and then they go out there and vote. Look at our health ministry, for example, coming out with a notice about what days you can use the lift and when you can't. Look at the matters with the Electricity Corporation of Ghana, for example. I mean, think about it. Where really do you want to find hope? Save in the church and in the mosque, for example.
Interesting. Well, let's make tracks. I'll share some of these stories that the papers capture with you and find out whether there isn't hope or whether there is. But let's start with the Daily Graphic newspaper, and thanks for those initial thoughts that you've shared with us, Madam Joyce. The military bust explosive producer seizes 20,000 pieces. That's with the Daily Graphic. And the Ghana Armed Forces, according to the story, has busted a syndicate of 13 foreigners allegedly engaged in the manufacture of the explosives in Tapkwa in the Western region. Now, over 20,000 pieces of illegal explosives were seized from the suspects, made up of 8 Chinese, 3 Togolese, an Ivorian, and a Nigerian. The explosives, which were seized on the premises of Mohammed Brothers Company Limited and Dakete Mines in Takwa, included about 10,000 kilograms of ammonium nitrate and about 20,000 explosive charges in the form of dynamite, which had been prepared from ammonium nitrate. Quoting, most of the ammonium nitrate was concealed in flour and rice sacks, the GAF, that is the Ghana Armed Forces, said in a statement yesterday. According to the statement, the operation led by personnel of the 2nd Infantry Battalion, quote, was premised on detailed intelligence aimed at clamping down on the manufacture, sale, and use of illegal dynamite in parts of the country, especially mining areas. That's the first story. Very troubling one, especially because while they may end up being used for mining purposes, what if they fell into the wrong hands? With the terrorist situation in the sub-region, with the insurgency, and with some of the pockets of conflict across the country, this could be disastrous. But let's head to page 16, and that is where we're going to take 2 more stories, and then I'll cede to my guest this morning to also comment on them. Telcos remove unregistered SIM cards from database today. And the Ghana Chamber of Telecommunications has urged subscribers of MTN, Airtel, Tigo, and Vodafone to complete the registration of their subscriber identification module cards, that is their SIM cards, with their Ghana cards before April 17, 2023, to avoid losing their numbers forever. The Chamber, which represents the service providers, said that was to avoid any inconvenience as its members complied with a directive by the National Communications Authority for the mobile network operators to deactivate, delink, and remove all SIM cards not fully re-registered from all databases by today. And so if you've not done that, that is what is being said. Per the data from the Ministry of Communications and Digitalization, 42.5 million SIMs had been initially registered. And of the number, 25,150,522 of those SIM cards had been successfully registered in Ghana as of last February. That is the 9th. And finally, manage diabetes as epidemic. That's according to an expert. I only bring this in because of the health situation in the country currently. You hear of so many people, even young people, that's the fear. I don't know whether it's how we're eating, what we're doing, the fact that a lot of people are not working out and all of that, but it's becoming prevalent, and you know the cost of sometimes these ailments. Now, a diabetes treatment expert, Dr. Yakoba Atiase, has said diabetes has reached epidemic levels in the country, and so it should be managed as such. She is the head of the Diabetes Center at the Kolebu Teaching Hospital, and she explained that from being a rare disease 50 years ago, diabetes is now everywhere in the country, adding that half the patients on admission at hospitals were being diagnosed with diabetes, though they were on admission for different ailments. So they come with one thing, and they only find out that, oh, I'm actually diabetic, which also points to the fact that we all should be checking ourselves more frequently. So 3 stories to reflect on, depending on which ones you want to choose. Re-registration of SIM cards, deactivation of some of those, managing diabetes, and the big one, the military busting explosive producers. Joyce, over to you.
Excellent. I prefer Joyce. I think that's much, much easier and simpler than all the clumsy attempts you're making to add some title.
Go ahead.
Well, look, I would start off with the one on health. I think a healthy nation is also something that we ought to take very, very seriously. And yes, I have many friends of mine who have actually suffered all sorts of things. In fact, recently, an aunt of mine very tragically has lost both of her limbs because of that. And you also know this is also a matter that also affects the function of the kidneys as well. And you do know how much it costs to go for dialysis. Even the units are no longer sufficient countrywide to support people who come up with these sorts of issues and conditions. We know the situation in which the National Health Insurance also finds itself, and that irrespective of how many times we try to muzzle people who want to complain, the reality is that people are suffering. But yes, diabetes is also a lifestyle issue. And so we ought to watch it. You know, one thing I have observed, and I shudder to think, is that in Africa, for example, we consume way too much sugar. You know, it is something that I tell people all the time to try as much as possible to watch their diets. I think for diabetes in particular, and I know a friend who actually beat it. He took on a very serious exercise regime. He stopped eating a lot of things, went on a very serious diet, and yes, eventually he was able to manage it. Remember that the cost of these insulins and how regularly you need them also brings into question some of these things. And many people resort to herbal options and alternatives. And they themselves, I'm sure I've heard many people speak about the challenges to do with some of these herbal alternatives that we actually have tried to use one time or the other. So it is, these things are also about creating awareness, creating education. People need to be aware, people need to be conscious of it. Watch the quantities of food you eat, watch what you eat. Try as much as possible to move around a little bit more. And of course, some also have a certain genetic condition, which will also be the same. And so in both situations, nowhere cool. And under the circumstances, when you think about where we are financially and even regarding the economy, when you have some of these lifestyle things to take care of, that is an even bigger challenge. Don't forget, it also leads to many other comorbidities. And of course, the medications themselves will sometimes also lead to other health challenges. So please, maybe you should start or kick off a campaign. I remember Kojo Yankson used to do very well with that. Maybe it's something we need to do on. Yes, absolutely. Try as much as possible to offer some awareness, do some advocacy, do some education, but of course also try as much as possible to get our Ministry of Health, which cannot even procure vaccines for many of these other things that babies require, to try and improve upon our health facilities. At least if we can add on every now and then, why not? You know, I keep saying something and sometimes you can't help it. When we look at Ghana over the years, when we look at the contributions of past administrations to our health, and of course, this administration notwithstanding, day in, day out, there are additional contributions that are required to be made. But the numbers are huge and challenging. Recently, I visited Kolebu and I met an ophthalmologist. You should see the number of people who were outside his door. On that morning, had well over 200 people. Remember that another challenge that people who have diabetes or diabetics will develop eventually will be challenges to do with what? Eyesight. So there's the kidney issues, there's the issues to do with the eyesight, there's blood pressure to manage, there's all sorts of things that will certainly be an offshoot of a diabetic's life eventually. So it's not an easy ailment to deal with. It also is probably something that will be with you for the rest of your life. Alcohol, consuming too much sugar, eating at the wrong time, carbohydrates, and yes, even our diet, mostly full of carbohydrates. I mean, kinke, wache, gari, all the things we love. What you should do is start to eat in moderation. Eat early, eat smaller quantities, but above all, take exercise very, very seriously. I listened to one of the pensioners who said that he actually different types of medications to keep himself alive.
Right.
Think about that when you have to face it. So we have all of these challenges, and I actually sympathize with all the people who develop these illnesses as we go along. But I hope that we'll find ways to create more awareness, to educate people above, or at least continue to augment the suffering of people who find themselves, unfortunately, in that category.
Let's make the most of the 6 to 7 minutes that we have left. I'll try to breeze through a number of the papers. Now, the Ghanaian Times newspaper has some interesting ones in there. Efforts towards IMF support, Ghana completes prior actions, earns global applause for economic recovery program. This is a two-pronged story, so I'll look at pages 11 and 13. Then there is this interesting one. If you recall, police brief families on investigations into death of riot victim, robbery suspect at Nkoranza. And the other story on page 13 that I was speaking of, government not doing another round of DDEP. That's according to the finance minister. Now, as media, there's a lot that we've been saying on this, but we're still unsure now, per the reaction of the finance ministry, what exactly the intent was. But let's take that story first on page 3. A police delegation on last Friday met with the families of Victor Owusu. I don't know whether you recall him, Joyce, who died in a rioting incident in Nkoranza, and a deceased robbery suspect, Albert Donko, to update them on police investigations into the 2 incidents that occurred on April the 25th, 2022, that led to the death of the 2 persons. A police source told the Ghanaian Times that the delegation first met the family of Albert Donko and briefed them on investigations conducted into the incident that occurred at 12:35 a.m. on April 25th, 2022 at Nkoranza, leading to the death of Donko. Now, the source recalled that the police received a distress call from a passenger on board a Pragya who said some armed men had blocked the Nkoranza-Jema highway and were robbing road users of their belongings. It goes on, but if you recall this particular story, this person was apprehended, not seen again, and it came to the fore later on that this person had passed this Donko. And it has become a very thorny issue. In fact, if you look at the Daily Guide, which also reports that issue, the banner headline there, "Your son was an armed robber." That's according to the police. So that is the culmination of all of this per the Ghana Police Service. And the family is still very aggrieved by the situation, saying that their family member was not an armed robber. So that's the first story. Now, the 2 finance-related stories to wrap it up. Ghana has completed all prior actions necessary to receive support for its economic recovery program, the IMF has confirmed. Now, according to Abebe Selassie, IMF Director for Africa, the only outstanding issue was the confirmation of financing assurances from external creditors. He, however, noted that expecting a resolution to the matter, they are expectant when the Paris Club meets again this week. And tied to that, government not doing another round of DDEP, which is interesting. Because what we heard from the finance minister, he now says he was taken out of context. So here's what it says. There are no plans by the government to conduct another round of domestic debt exchange program targeted at pension funds, the Minister of Finance, Ken Ofori-Atta, has said, speaking during a virtual engagement with the country's external creditors on the macroeconomic update on the economy on Thursday, monitored by the Ghanaian Times. He assured that government had not planned to carry out any second round of DDEP program on pension funds. And he says it was a misunderstanding. Quick reactions?
Well, very, very quickly, and I believe that the unfortunate story about what happened to the young man actually feeds into the story about the military actually busting the people carrying explosives and illegal mines and arms and all of that. Look, try traveling from Accra to the northern region. They mount roadblocks, they attack and rob vehicles, rob buses, name it. I think it is actually speaking to a challenge to do with our security currently in this country. It feeds into what is going on in the Upper East region. It feeds into the fact that there are many of these illegal arms and explosives in the wrong hands. Please, 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 we ought to do something about this proliferation of arms in our system, especially in the wrong hands and under the circumstances. You know the process for acquiring these ammos. You know how and what it takes, for example, for any individual to acquire, even legally, an arm even for personal protection and defense. And do we even want to get to that point where everybody driving, traveling has to have one way or the other to protect themselves? I think not. The earlier we do something about these things, the better. Maybe the military should continue across the country. We don't want to see photographs and videos of what happened in Ashaiman, for example, repeat themselves, but we want to see more of this attempt to curb this illegal trade and smuggling in arms across the country. Then secondly, let me ask you, Evans, we as a people know how difficult and challenging times are to buy fuel, to pay for basic amenities, what our incomes can no longer do. Whatever investments you have, you and I know that they've lost value of about 50%, and that is even a conservative estimate. We know how many people have their monies locked up in these bonds in Ghana, who are the bondholders. We have the other category of Euro bondholders, and then we also believe This is also going to affect enormously our very small middle class who work very hard, retire, and cannot even have access to the monies they've saved for their own comfort. Look, I don't want to believe these headlines.
Right.
And I think that we should stop trying to major on minors. That a mouthpiece of our country would say that a country has received applause. Really? Why didn't Greece receive applause? Why didn't Sri Lanka receive applause? Why would the country with the worst performing currency receive applause? Why are we not questioning why a government that campaigned on never going back to the IMF after mismanaging recklessly an economy that was posited to grow at least by 8%, even then in 2017? What is there to be applauding our government or administration for example? The IMF is coming with some very steep conditions, and you and I know that these will actually offer even more difficulty and hardship to the good people of this country. Look, let Ghanaians be the litmus test of whether or not the government has performed or failed. I think that on a scorecard, government presently has performed abysmally. The inconsistencies, the contradictions, genuinely, few of the Ghanaians who require an upliftment don't read these headlines. These are headlines just to create a certain impression. I think that we've gone for way too long with this kind of hype. Let's stop it and look at the figures even more closely. And I think that there are more critical things that we experience and suffer beyond other people or global people clapping for a government that literally wasted our resources and now need them to come back. I think that is not right. That is unacceptable. But yes, my heartfelt condolences and sympathies to all these people who have actually had to lose a family member because of these issues. You know, look, I am a parent too. These things can be very, very difficult. I don't want to comment too much on the content of the story or the headline because I really don't have the details. I don't know what he was doing as an individual, whether indeed he was an armed robber or not. You know, these are matters.
Well, one thing we know for sure is that the family protested this vehemently. They have kept up the protest and all of that.
I mean, think about it. You know, when you appear at someone's doorstep and this is the news you're bringing them, I mean, you know our society. That's not very easy for any parent or family, for example, to accept. I mean, this will be a lot on the family's name for many years to come. Maybe he has an immediate family, his own children. You know, these are very complicated matters. And I think that maybe in future, the police can handle them better. Maybe they should offer some evidence, show them reasons why they believe that. You know, sometimes even when you offer them a report, they'll probably have recourse to their own lawyers to actually vet these things. They'll speak to people who know him. You know, look, sometimes even families can form part of the community investigations for our police. And they do that sometimes. They go to the families themselves. Try and find out more about the individual.
Joyce, unfortunately, our time has run out. I just want to give you these headlines for maybe a 30-second reflection as we leave. The final newspaper says it is possible for NPP to win election 2024 with Dr. Baumia. That's Dr. John Kuma saying that. And he has called Dr. Mahamudu Baumia an inspirational leader who is capable of turning around the fortunes of the country amidst the current economic challenges. Then we also know in the Western region, the NDC has suspended officers for hooting at your member of parliament there. I found that story interesting. I just wanted to briefly take your thoughts. One, Kofi Ako Noko, who was in the Evalu Ajomoro Jura constituency. And that is what happened, the hooting incident. And any quick reactions on these two right before we wrap?
Very quickly. You know, look, I think that it ought to stop, that all political parties must actually ensure some level of discipline, especially for our members and the grassroots in particular. And, you know, these things have a tendency to incite and inflame also reactions that we don't expect. And, you know, running up into the election 2024, there are very, very serious security issues already, and we ought not to add on with all of these other issues. And I have no doubt in my mind that our party executive is well poised to ensure that there is discipline and that they control the party. But of course, going on to the other subject matter, look, it is something that I think we ought to put in proper context. Please, Dr. Mahamudu Baumia was part of the system that has failed abysmally to perform. I believe that Dr. Mahamudu Baumia has nothing to offer But he can speak for himself. Dr. Kuma is the same person who told us Ghana was never going to go back to the IMF. Please, I think that we've heard enough of these accolades. The same people he was singing for and preaching for who are suffering, the hardship is still here. The nurses are all leaving our country. The brain drain has worsened under his time in office. Please, I don't want us to reduce it to a very partisan conversation this morning. I'm sure the good people of Ghana do know that Dr. Bawumia has no credibility, that his integrity has been called into question so many times, that his capacity even to run this country, even in the capacity of a chairman of the economic management team, has been brought into serious question. Okay. And that the fact that the economy that he actually promised to deliver us from has completely failed under his watch leaves very little room for hope of any expectations that he will do anything better than what
Joyce Bawa Mokhtari is spokesperson for former President John Dramani Mahama. She's a lawyer as well, and she joined us for this review. Thank you so much, Joyce.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And thanks for not allowing me to drive all the way to your station. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I knew that would be a hassle. Thank you so much. And that is how we wrap the news review. This segment has been brought to us all by Endpoint Homeopathic Clinic, and they are offering free prostate screening, free female fertility screening as well. You can locate them in Accra Spintex opposite the Shell signboard in Kumasi, Kronoma, Buehia, behind the Angel Educational Complex, Takrade Anaji State Tema Community 22, Techiman Hanswa at Siama and Zima. If you'd like to call them, the numbers are 0244 867 068 or 0274 234 321. Endpoint Homeopathic Clinic, the end to chronic disease.